Welcome in the second section of our course. In this section, we'll be building RESTful interfaces with Spring Boot. Firstly, we'll start from creating persistence for our domain object. In the previous section, we saw the entity API and we defined our domain object. In this video, we'll try to persist that in the database. Next, we'll be building RESTful interfaces with Spring MVC HateOS. So we'll try to expose our resource via RESTful API. In the third video, we'll be using Spring Webflux and Web Client. So we'll try to create reactive RESTful service. In the last video, we will write an integration test in which we'll be calling services with REST template and dealing with outages. And this is a first video in which we'll be creating persistence for our domain object. We'll start from creating repository for our entity. Next, we'll see that we need to extend Crude repository. And at the end, we'll be defining available SQL queries. So we are starting from a travel repository interface in this time. This is very important that this is an interface. It needs to be interface because Spring, at the initialization of application, will extend that travel repository and create own class that is a component, and that implementation of this travel repository will be injected whenever we want. It needs to work like this because the travel repository is an abstract thing. It doesn't know about the data source that is underneath. So it can be Cassandra, it can be some SQL database, whatever we want, but at the time of writing that class, we don't need to worry about it. First thing that we need to worry about is to extend the Crude repository. This is yet another interface from the Spring, and it has two generic parameters. First one is an entity, and second is ID. So our entity is a travel, and as you remember from the first section, we defined the ID field. ID field is a long, so we also need to pass long here. Next, we want to create two additional methods, because in the Crude repository, the nicest thing is that it has a lot of methods out of the box. So it has a save all, find by ID, find all, count, delete, and so on. We don't need to implement it. It will be auto-generated by Spring. But if you want to do something extra to define specific methods for our context, we need to write that in the travel repository interface, and we can do it via the query annotation. So first thing is find by user ID. We remember that our entity travel ID is the long, is auto-generated, but sometimes we want to find out all travels from this specific user ID. So if you want to do it, we need to do a find by user ID. We will have one parameter that is a user ID string, and we are query using select t from travel t, where t user ID is equal to our parameter. So it means that we are able to retrieve list of travels for the specific user ID. Next thing that is even more special is finding by destination, but this time the parameter is a destination string, and also we are using that alias inside of the SQL query. So this is a first part of our persistence, but let's test it if it works as expected. We will be using Spring Boot test annotation that was used and supplied within the dependency that we spoke about in the first video of this course. So we can see that it has some useful properties, but we are running everything with a Spring runner. So basically, it starts the Spring context, dependency injection framework, and it using JUnit runner. So we need it because we want to inject the travel repository here. So it will be auto-wired thing here, as you can see. So first test that we are defining is that it should save travel and retrieve it by user ID. So we are defining our entity of user ID Joseph, and source of travel is London, destination is Paris. Next, we are saving that travel into the travel repository. Once we do that, we want to leverage our find by user ID method that we implemented and get all travels for that user ID implemented, and it has only one travel, so at the index 0, we should have destination Paris and source London. So let's start this test. We can see that whole Spring context is initializing right now, so that test is not so fast. It is not a unit test, more integration one. We can see that our test passed, so everything is as expected. Second test is quite more complex. This time we are supplying the ID ourselves. We will see that this is also possible, although we are using auto annotation. This time we will supply 3 travels from London to Barcelona, Amsterdam Barcelona, and Amsterdam Madrid. And we want to leverage the find by destination method Barcelona. So we should get 2 results because the travel number 2 and 1 is to Barcelona. So let's start this test. We can see that our test passed, so we were able to successfully insert and retrieve that data.